Canada-US relations rapidly deteriorating since President Donald Trump took office for his second term, tensions have shown no signs of slowing down as Canadian travelers have increasingly boycotted travel to the US in the past year.
The traffic levels dropped, 5% one month, 10% the next month.
A recent survey from Snowbird Advisor found 70% of Canadians were planning to spend their winter in the U.S., down around 15% from 1 year prior, and nearly 25% were looking to spend the winter in non-U.S. destinations.
The policies of the U.S. administration down south, the fears of safety at the border, the national pride that we have as Canadians and Ontarians, wanting to support local business.
Air Transat just announced it will cease flying to the United States completely by summer 2026. But Air Transat is not alone. WestJet announced it is suspending 16 U.S. routes for summer 2026. Vancouver to Boston, gone. Vancouver to Nashville, San Francisco, Tampa, San Diego, all suspended. The airline is reducing its full-year transborder flying by close to 10%, with a 15% reduction during what were historically peak U.S. travel times. WestJet's statement was blunt. We saw a notable decline in transborder travel demand throughout 2025. We see no indication that this trend will change in the foreseeable future. The data from Statistics Canada confirms what the airlines already know. Canadian return trips from the US fell 24.3% in January 2026 compared to January 2025, dropping from 2.1 million trips to 1.6 million. Car trips down 27%. Air travel down 18%. That is the sharpest decline since the COVID-19 pandemic. In November 2025, Canadian trips to the US fell 23.6% compared to November 2024. This is not one bad month. This is 8 consecutive months of double-digit declines. The collapse is sustained, measurable, and accelerating. Aviation analytics firm Cirium tracked the capacity reductions. Airlines are operating 6.2% fewer flights and offering 10.1% fewer seats between the US and Canada compared to February 2025. WestJet July schedule to the US was reduced by 26.2% following the latest cuts. That is not trimming around the edges. That is pulling back major portions of the network. Across the market, Canadian bookings to the US were down 17% between October 2025 and January 2026. Official data from the US National Travel and Tourism Office shows 4 million fewer Canadians visited the US in 2025, a 22% decline. The decline has been far steeper than the reduction in US travel to Canada. In August 2025, 5% fewer Americans traveled by car to Canada, while air arrivals fell by 4%. Meanwhile, Canadian domestic tourism strengthened. The World Travel and Tourism Council forecasts domestic tourist spending in Canada will reach $104 billion by the end of 2025, an increase of 8% year on year. Canadians are not traveling less. They are avoiding the United States and redirecting their travel budgets elsewhere. Major U.S. attractions are feeling the impact. Tour operators report a 30% drop in bookings for U.S. Disney holidays from Canadian travelers. At the same time, more Canadians are choosing alternatives like Disneyland Paris. The trend extends beyond theme parks. Intrepid Travel reported a 42% drop in bookings for U.S. national park trips in 2026, with Canadian bookings down 93%. Hotel groups are seeing uneven results. Hilton Worldwide reported stronger revenue performance in most regions except the United States, while Marriott International signaled concern about international demand. For Florida tourism industry, this is catastrophic. Canadian visitors spent $11.2 billion in Florida in 2024, representing the state #1 international tourism market. With Air Transat and WestJet abandoning or reducing routes, Florida hotels, theme parks, and restaurants face an estimated $2 to $3 billion revenue loss in 2026. Walt Disney World receives approximately 800,000 Canadian visitors annually, generating $2 billion in revenue. If Canadian visitors decline by 20%, Disney loses $400 million. Universal Orlando, with 500,000 Canadian visitors generating $900 million annually, faces a $180 million loss under the same scenario. The cruise industry faces equally severe disruption. Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale, the second largest cruise port in the world, serves approximately 900,000 Canadian passengers annually representing 22% of total passengers and the largest international market. Air Transat was the primary feeder airline for Fort Lauderdale cruises. With Air Transat eliminating Montreal, Fort Lauderdale, and Quebec City, Fort Lauderdale routes, Canadian cruise passengers will plummet. Alternatives include driving to Miami, a 6+ hour journey from Montreal flying through Toronto at an additional 200+ Canadian dollars, or booking Caribbean cruises from Quebec City or Montreal instead. Quebec residents face the hardest impact. Montreal, with a population of 4.3 million, lost all direct Florida flights. The city once had 3 daily flights to Fort Lauderdale, plus 1 daily to Orlando. Quebec City population 800,000 lost its only U.S. route to Fort Lauderdale. Alternative options now require flying through Toronto via Air Canada, Porter, or WestJet, adding 2+ hours and 150 to 300 Canadian dollars, or connecting through U.S. hubs like Newark, JFK, or Chicago, which requires expensive tickets and ESTA authorization. Some will drive Montreal to Orlando is 22 hours, 1,500 miles. Many will simply give up and book Mexico, the Dominican Republic, or Cuba instead. Quebec snowbirds, elderly Canadians spending 3 to 6 months annually in Florida face an impossible choice. An estimated 200,000 Quebec snowbirds primarily travel to Fort Lauderdale, Fort Myers, Sarasota, and Naples. Air Transat offered affordable options at 300 to 500 Canadian dollars round trip. Air Canada and Porter charged 700 to 1,200 Canadian dollars. Many snowbirds cannot afford Air Canada prices. They will either drive a 22-hour journey, posing safety risks for elderly drivers, or abandon Florida entirely. While Quebec residents are hardest hit, Western Canada faces similar disruption. WestJet cut 15 U.S. routes from Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and Winnipeg. Toronto residents maintain better options through Air Canada, WestJet, Porter, and Flair, but even those carriers are reducing U.S. capacity. Air Canada has implemented a 10% capacity reduction to the U.S. compared to 2025, though it has not announced major cancellations yet. So what is driving this collapse? 3 converging factors. First, political tensions. Trump administration tariffs threats to make Canada the 51st state and hostile rhetoric created a perception that the U.S. government is hostile to Canada. Canadians do not want to visit countries they perceive as unwelcoming. Second, currency weakness. The Canadian dollar sits at 70 cents US in February 2026, down from 74 cents in 2024. That makes US trips 30% more expensive than 2 years ago. A $1,000 US hotel in Florida costs 1,429 Canadian dollars in 2026 versus 1,315 Canadian dollars in 2024, 114 Canadian dollars more expensive. Third, stronger alternatives. European travel offers stable euro to Canadian dollar exchange rates and cheap transatlantic fares. Caribbean and Latin American destinations like Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba offer all-inclusive packages cheaper than U.S. trips. Airlines are responding by redirecting capacity to destinations where demand is stronger. Air Transat is launching 9 new routes for summer. 2026, Toronto and Montreal to Accra. Ghana, Toronto, and Montreal to Dakar. Senegal, Toronto to Tirana. Albania, Montreal to Reykjavik. Iceland, Montreal to Agadir, Morocco. The carrier recently launched Toronto and Montreal to Rio de Janeiro and increased frequencies to Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and Caribbean destinations. WestJet announced expanded domestic service with daily flights from Calgary to Campbell River, British Columbia, starting May 15 in Edmonton, to Terrace, British Columbia, starting twice weekly May 19. Calgary to Sault Ste. Marie and North Bay, Ontario, twice weekly starting June 12 and June 19, respectively. Edmonton International Airport, where 5 US-bound routes are being suspended, confirmed the shift. While we are seeing fewer passengers choose to travel to the United States this year, overall demand remains strong. Domestic travel continues to grow, and we are seeing travelers shift towards international sun destinations in the winter season. WestJet echoed that assessment. Demand for domestic, Latin American, Caribbean, transatlantic, and transpacific destinations remains strong. As such, WestJet has redeployed its fleet by increasing capacity on routes Canadians want to fly. Travel expert Claire Newell warned the decline may not have hit the bottom yet. The amount of people going to the US just continually comes down and down. It is not just the political climate. People have safety concerns. People do not want to cross the border. It is also the dollar. The reality is our Canadian dollar does not go very far in the US. Those factors, political tensions, safety concerns, currency weakness, are not resolving quickly. Political rhetoric could worsen before improving. The Canadian dollar could weaken further if economic conditions deteriorate. Safety perceptions, once damaged, take years to rebuild. For passengers who already booked Air Transat flights to Florida between May and June 2026, the airline is legally required under Canadian Transportation Agency rules to refund the full ticket price within 30 days. Air Transat typically processes refunds in 7 to 14 business days. Passengers can also request rebooking on partner airlines like Porter, though Porter charges 30 to 50% more than Air Transat, or rebook to different destinations like Cancun, Punta Cana, or Varadero, Cuba. Will Air Transat return to the US? The airline statement was non-committal. Flight scheduling to Florida for the 2026-2027 winter season will be determined at a later date. Translation: unlikely unless Canadian demand surges, the Canadian dollar strengthens significantly, or rhetoric from the President of the United States softens. None of those seem probable before November 2026. Midterms. Air Transat operated 9 US routes in March 2025, cut to 3 by January 2026, and now 0 by July 2026. The trajectory is complete US withdrawal. The airline data does not lie. Capacity down 10%. Bookings down 17 to 24%. Major carriers withdrawing entirely. This is not temporary turbulence. This is the restructuring of North American aviation. And the United States just lost its northern market.